Hello and welcome to Nerdy for Nerds by Nerds. I'm Nerdist Dave, and today I'm joined by Darrell Hayhurst. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much.
So Darrell, you're a freelance writer for RPGs and game designer. I know you mostly from Torg because that's how we were kind of introduced.
Yeah, yeah. I
Ulysses
killed you
North
guys.
America. It seems like forever ago now, right?
It was at least a year ago, wasn't it? It was pre-COVID, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, I think it was
Years
longer than a
ago.
year.
2 or 3 years, actually. Wow.
It's been a while when we did Saver Dice and you ran the Torg game for us. Which had some quite a few memorable moments and was a lot of fun. It was my first experience with that system, and
Well, it's my oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you're a fantastic GM. So
Well, it was my first experience like GMing for an online game, and which is
yeah,
very, very different from running like at your table. Like you gotta project in a whole different way, and you know,
yeah. So yeah, once it becomes like a stream game, it's not just a game anymore. It's also kind of a show at that point.
it is, and that's what made it hard. It's
Yeah,
at least for me, right? Like show like writing games and running them is my jam.
yeah,
Showmanship, that's a little bit tougher. And I was telling you, like my instinct is always like I before I was a writer, I was a teacher. So my instinct is always, oh, when there's a question, let's slow down and let's like get into the mechanics of it. And here's why. So you learn something for next time. And on an online show, that's exactly what you don't want to do.
yeah, yeah.
It's like, no, 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 just move on. Like keep the story rolling. And it's like, okay, I learned that as I went.
Yeah, it is tough because it goes against like some natural inclinations. So, what systems are you writing for, or have you written for?
Oh boy. So have written for is a pretty big list, but I'll keep it to the top ones. Actually, what I broke into the industry on, and I've tried to break into the industry like 3 times, and the third time finally stuck.
Third time was a charm.
Third time was the charm.
Yeah.
And with that one, I came in on Ninja Crusade. Eloy Lasanta has a game line. He has several games, and that was one of them. And he took a chance on me as a writer, and that kind of proved that I could do it. And then more work came. A lot of that was Savage Worlds, which is my current favorite tabletop system. You know, out of the box, love Savage Worlds, and that led to Torg, and Torg has led to the new Space 1889 that's going to be coming out, which in the future. But yeah, so most of my printed stuff is going to be Savage Worlds or Torg at this point. There's some Ninja Crusade, and there's a few one-offs here and there, but that's the majority of it.
Yeah, I'm still mystified that I have not yet played Savage Worlds because I mean, as far as popularity for RPGs, it's got
Call
to be.
me.
Yeah, we gotta make it happen. It's got to be like right around the top in the top five, right? So
It is, and that's it's yeah, it's I mean it's an independent, right? So it's like an order of magnitude
yeah,
below like Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder and all that. Although now Savage Worlds and Pathfinder have their thing, you know, that's coming out.
yeah. How did
But
that come about?
so they asked, like so
Yeah,
many, like it was the same with the Savage Worlds and Rifts, where you're like, oh, that could never be a thing, but you know, we like to joke at like the big conventions, like all the designers go to one bar and you
yeah,
can go
yeah,
to that bar and you can see some of these things happen. And it's literally just asking, like, hey, you know, because Savage Worlds, it's a system that does a lot of different settings, and they've got some fantasy settings, but they don't have like their bedrock one, right? Like in superheroes, the Savage World setting is necessary evil, where you play like all the good guys got wiped out,
mhm.
and so you're just like the only ones left were the villains, and they were protected because they were in super jail, right? And so it's like, well, the world's at threat, and you
For
live on the
society
world,
now.
yeah, so you're up. And it's a really fun setting, and it's kind of like the default supers setting that all the stuff builds on. And they never really had that for fantasy. Like kind of Lankmar was that for a while. You know, they had the license, but there's a lot of different versions of Lankmar available. So it never really quite was the thing. So they were talking like, well, what do we want our fantasy setting to look like? Is it Lankmar? Is it the very first Savage Worlds setting to ever come out was called Evernight, and it's awesome because for like the first act, it looks like Dungeons and Dragons,
Uh,
and then basically like space dudes from Krull land and take over the planet, and you're like, we're fighting space dudes from Skrull. This is not the Dungeons and Dragons game I thought it was.
yeah,
It's deadly, right? But doesn't it's not quite like, oh, this is a fantasy game. It's like a fantasy game with a twist.
right.
So they were like, well, what do we do for fantasy? And they're like, well, Pathfinder paths are awesome. Like, we like them. Other people like them. Could we do that?
D&D liked them before they got rid of Dragon
Right.
and Dungeon Magazine, right?
Right. So, and a lot of it comes down to you just ask, like, hey, we'd kind of like to do this. And they're like, that sounds awesome. Let's make a deal. And then it happens. And it was the same with Rifts, right? Like, no one thought that would be a thing, but Sean Patrick Fannin knows Kevin Simbeta and is just like, hey, we'd like to do this.
Everybody knows,
Cool.
So I kind of crap on Palladium a lot because although like there's a lot of great concepts, but that game has been the same game forever. Like I was talking to a friend, they're like, yeah, like they're like, you can't get it anymore, right? It's it's a thing that happened. Like no, they still sell the same books.
But and to some that's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, and they got a lot of like great licenses early on. And it's just not a modern RPG at this point. And
yeah,
I've kind of become spoiled to the modern RPGs.
I'm with you on that, and like, and here's the thing, like I always try really hard. I'll never to not say anything negative about a system, right? It just might not be to my taste.
Yeah,
that was one of the things that was exciting to me about the Savage Worlds version of Rifts. Is like, cool, I love Rifts. We played it back in the 80s. Like, I like the setting, but the system's not for me, right? But I can play it in Savage Worlds now, and I can get use out of books that I bought from Palladium, so it's a win for both. That's fantastic, And we're hoping that Pathfinder is the same, right? Like, that's like, okay, cool. Here's if D20, if you're sick to death of D20s, which I hit that point at a certain point, I'm like, okay, I don't want to roll another D20 again. I got over it. Like I'm back, right? But for a while, I just couldn't take it. And being able to play these cool published adventures in the system that I already love, that's great. And then the other hope is there's a lot of fans of just fantasy that don't really care what system is. It's just, this is just another open door. Like, hey, try this. You might like it.
Yeah, Challenger says, but I don't have to buy the core book 6 times like I like D&D. Well, so that like there's truth to that, but also there's not, because there's still people playing AD&D, right? They didn't rebuy any books; they're just playing the same game, and it might be the same number of people that are playing Palladium. Like,
and that's a total industry thing, right?
Yeah,
like, we one of the risks that you run is you're just writing to the same people like over and over. And I get this, on Torg, right? It's like, we've got like a nice, stable, very lively and alive group of people, but it's the same people. And you're like, okay, we're selling to the same people over and over and over again. How do we open this up and get new people in? And Eternity broadened that somewhat. And now it's like, how do we broaden it again? Is it streaming? Is it, Twitch? How do we find more people? How do we appeal to that larger audience? Like that's publisher problems, right? Writer problems are like, screw it. I want to make those people happy.
Yeah.
Like they're the ones buying the game. They're the ones that are going to buy the next one.
It's the next pay grade up that has to worry about that anyway. So
right. Yeah.
Now, I do love genre mashes like Torg and Savage Worlds. That you mentioned, because I'm kind of like, if I'm gonna play fantasy, I'll probably just play D&D, and if I want to play another genre, then I start looking outside of D&D for other games.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I never played it, but I thought one of the Pathfinder paths, it basically looks like World War I Russia, and I'm like, oh my god, that's like the perfect fit for Savage Worlds.
Oh yeah.
Like it does like guns and tanks and armor and stuff like that very elegantly. And it's like, oh man, I can't wait to try that. I think that's going to be an easier fit than some of the D20 mechanics, maybe.
Now,
Maybe that adventure works great. I don't know. I haven't played it.
I did start playing Pathfinder 2e because someone asked me. Right? They're like, "Hey, do you want to play in this game every other week?" I'm like, "Sure, I'll check it out." And I do like the character. I think I really do like the character creation in it. It's a bit much when you first like look at it, like top down. But someone's like, I'm like, I'm so spoiled by D&D Beyond, and then someone's like, "Oh, well, they got this app called Path Builder." I'm like, "Oh, this is great!" And I like build a character in like minutes, and it's so much easier when you can just see everything right there in front of you and you just like pick. Because I will say it's a little bit harder because like all the different choices you make add up different ways. So like that being able to see it all makes it so much easier.
Yeah. And they are like the nicest people. Like I got to finally meet some of the people in charge of all the Pathfinder and Starfinder. They're great. Like they're very lovely people. And I wish I could remember his name. It was I was very lucky before COVID and all this. I had to I got to go to UK Game Expo.
Okay.
And they had their GM that was in this Pathfinder 2.0 was still in beta at this time. But I swear, this guy was David Tennant. Like he looked like David Tennant. He sounded like David Tennant. So you're sitting at a table and here's basically David Tennant like running your game and playing goblin voices. And you're like, this is awesome. Like sign me up for this.
Yeah. Everyone I've dealt with has been awesome over there. I've only dealt with a few people, but everyone's been pretty great. Yeah. And I mean, I find most of the industry is kind of like that anyway.
Well,
it's small, so
it's a small industry. So like if you're a jerk, people stop working with you. Like there are some people that like just manage to linger, but despite that, and everyone like kind of parts around them, and everyone else, it's like, well, we've all got to get along because.
Yeah. So what is your favorite system to write for now?
As much as I write for Torg and all that, Savage Worlds is my favorite.
Yeah. So what's the appeal to that? Is it some of the properties that you work on over there, or is it the system itself?
So it's both. In terms of properties, so there was an adventure. It was basically the second one that came out for Savage Worlds, and it was called 50 Fathoms. And it blew my mind. It changed the way I gamed, and I love it to pieces, right? It's basically, pirates and magic, and you're on a different world, and it's got a big meta plot. But it opened my mind to gaming possibilities that I did not think any game could do. And once I embraced those, it made me a much better writer. And the fact that later on, basically last year, I got to write a 32-page expansion to 50 Fathoms.
Yeah.
This landmark in my own sort of design growth. It's like someone else getting to work on Star Wars, right? It's like, cool, I've arrived. Like I got to do that, but also just in terms of writing it, because it's very pulpy and immediate, in their style guide, they'll say, you cannot use the word, will or future tense. Like it's happening now. Everything is like, no, it's not they will do this. It's they do this or they don't.
5e's written the same way. I mean, I only know this because I have a really good content director and editor on staff, and like they're like, no, this is how it's written. And they pointed it out.
Yeah, and that's very common style, in the industry. Those of you that are looking at style and things like that, like it is
action oriented. It's more action oriented.
Yeah, and it makes it more interesting to read, right? But it's very the focus is on what are the players supposed to do. Like you're not necessarily like holding their hand and telling them what they're supposed to do, but you as the GM have to know like what do you do with this? This isn't just background, right? Like you don't write a sidebar on the holiday that's going on unless that's going to come up, right? How do the players interact with it? What's a thing that they do with it? And it emphasizes that strongly, and that's very much my style at the table. It's like, cool, what do you guys do? Like, that's what's important. And the other thing that I love, as much as I love the notion, like we talked about D&D 3.0, one of the things that was really fun was being able to see under the hood, and you could make your monster and be like, cool, here's a base goblin, and now I'll give it 5 levels, and it behaves this way, and that's predictable. Like, I know how that works. And I have a tendency to do that in my own designs. Like, like, oh yeah, the bad guys work the same way as the good guys, and you can build them and you can know, aha, they follow these same rules. And Savage Worlds very purposefully in the Style Guide says that is not how this works. Like, a regular player has to have a D8 fighting to have the sweep ability where they can attack everything around them. A monster, forget it. Just give it sweep. Doesn't matter if it's got
I prefer
D8
that design too.
It's so much better to work with. And also, as a player, that means you can have that unexpected thing where it's like, oh, like it's a big, clumsy giant, right? It's not a D12 to attack you. It's only like a D4. But it's hitting this whole swath of guys. You're like, oh, that's not something I can do.
Yeah, so I think for fun. Like in D&D from Curse of Strahd on, like they started like tweaking their NPCs to being like, instead of being like the characters, they became more like the monsters, right? And even like the generic ones in the monster manual. And it's so much better, right? Because they only have to exist for a short period of time, and it just doesn't matter what the system is. Pretty much they're going to be there for a short period of time, and then they're gone. So there's no reason for them to follow the rules of the players, because they're there all the time. That's why the rules have to be a certain way.
Yeah, well, and also it's about that discovery, right? Like, as much as I like the predictability of knowing, like, okay, he's only got a D6 fighting, he can't have sweep. That surprise, when it comes up. And the same when you're talking with an NPC or whatever, you're like, oh yeah, like, I know how this works. They can't, must be this or must not be that. And it's like, well, this is real life, quote unquote. That person's just weird. Like, they operate on a different level. And you're like, oh crap, I've got to be a little more open-minded about how I'm interacting with things. That's cool. I like it.
So Kelsey has a question. I'm curious about your take on publishing adventures and/or settings for existing systems outside of the OGL and SRD. Self-publish or reach out to the companies?
So if you're going to reach out to the company, there's a very specific way to do it. And I love these questions, by the way. Like, because I tried so hard to break into the industry, any help that I can give to anyone that's trying to break in, I'll drop whatever I am doing and help them, right? Because I've been there, right? So what you want to do, and COVID makes this harder, right? the first thing to do is go to conventions where
train your liver.
Well, that second thing, right? But yeah, like, go to the convention, and one of the things that David and I were talking about earlier is you learn who does what, right? Like, most people don't know who Shane Hensley is, but if you're in Savage Worlds, oh, Shane Hensley is the guy that wrote it. Monty Cook, like, these are names that you'll start to get and understand, or all the people in charge of Pathfinder and all that. And you want to find them, right? And at a convention, you can just talk to them. They'll be around and they love it. We love having people come up and say, cool, I played your game and I like it. Awesome. That's really cool. I would like to write for it. Oh, do you have a card? Have a card. Write on the card, game writer for Pathfinder or for Savage Worlds or whatever, and give it to them, and they'll keep it, right? That's the first and most important thing you can do. Like, the next thing is actually play a game with them. Run that game at the convention, because sometimes we do, we'll go play in those games and we're kind of talent scouting. Like, hey, this person wrote a unique adventure for our game system. What are they doing with it? Are they good? Cool. That's pretty neat. Let's talk, right? Like, that can be a thing. The liver joke is a lot of this happens at the bar after, and there's usually only one bar that everybody goes to. So like
Yeah.
keep your ear open, go to that bar, and especially at small conventions are the really great place for this, because like a Genghis Con it's not a small convention, but it feels like a small convention because it's one hotel and everyone's there, and you're seeing the people like over and over and over again during the day, and you talk to them and you get to know them, and like that's important. you know Now in the COVID realm where you can't do that face to face, uh if there's a contact information for every company, and follow that. They'll say, like at Savage World, there'll be info at Peg, or Jody is probably your primary contact. Whoever's on the webpage there, that's who you send the email to, and you say, I've got an idea. I'd like to do this. Don't give details about the idea because we can't read it, because we're probably working on something very much like it, and we don't want you to think we stole it from you. We don't want to steal it from you, and this is why there are some jerks in the industry, but they don't last. So like a company like a Pathfinder, like a Pinnacle, or anyone else, or Paizo, they don't want to steal from you. They don't want to be accused of stealing from you, and it's incredibly important to them that accusation not get leveled. So if it's got information, they'll just delete it. They're not even going to read it. So you say, I got a pitch. I'd like to give you a pitch, and they'll give you their mechanisms for getting that pitch, if they're even in the market for a pitch. I think the best way to break in for a lot of people, and Pinnacle does this, they've got a program called One Sheets, and they're 1,000 words. It's a little mini adventure that you do, and it pays a flat rate. I can't remember. It's like $100 or something like that, if they accept it. But you write it up, they put it up there. Cool. Here's a little 1-page adventure. But if you can do that, most people can't. You proved I can finish a project that I was given. I can write to constraints, 1,000 words. I can follow your style guide doing it. That puts you ahead of 99.9% of everyone trying to write for RPGs. Like that's your in. So I hope that answers your question. That helps in some way.
Yeah, and I find like the smaller companies, like you go right to their booths at conventions and talk to the guy, right, or the
Oh
girl,
yeah,
as
absolutely.
the case may be, right? So
Absolutely. That's how I met Eloy for my break-in. I just
uh,
walked up and said, "Cool, I like your game, man."
yeah,
And that's it.
yeah, and most gamers like to talk about gaming, so it's not really hard to get people to talk, and especially about the things that they've done, right? So
Yeah, yeah. And don't start with "Let me tell you about my character." Like,
yeah,
no, it's probably not the good in. But here's what I did with your game. That's
yeah,
actually pretty interesting. And don't be afraid to be like, and here's something that I tweaked, because we, like, as designers, we're tinkerers and we love that stuff. I'm not insulted that someone changes Torg or
yeah.
something that I wrote. I'm intrigued by it. I'm like, cool. How'd you do it? Oh yeah, let's talk.
So like I said, I met you through Torg and Ulysses. What games do they have over there? We were talking a little bit
Oh
beforehand, and
man,
you mentioned what is it, Space 1884? And I
Space
looked it up.
1889, right? Okay,
1889.
so
Yeah.
we don't. So I'll do Space 1889 last.
Okay.
That one's because that's my baby, right? So what most people in America know us for now is Torg. Like that's been our biggest hit here. Torg was it's a legacy game, right? It came from the 80s. Shane Hensley, who did Savage Worlds, wrote for Torg, rewrote the new one, Torg Eternity, and it's we've got a vibrant living community for that, and that's great. Much bigger in Germany. It has fans here, but it's never broken through in quite the same way. Is their fantasy setting the Dark Eye? And it's more of a low fantasy where they get very much into the medieval, cities. It's got magic and all that, but it tends to be more like that low level Dungeons and Dragons. And it's been a alternative to Dungeons and Dragons in Germany for 30 years, and it's very popular there. And it has its adherents here too. Fading Suns, Bill Bridges, game of the far flung future and spaceships and all that. That's the Kickstarter backers have it now, and it should be coming out for everyone else very soon. That's a big one. We've got on the docket coming out is Myth. There's a role-playing game based on the board game Myth, and that's something Ross Watson's working on. It's using a similar system to what he cooked up for the Warhammer Wrath and Glory. And then Space 1889, another legacy game. So, and we don't, it's not that we're intentionally going for nostalgia. It's just that when an opportunity comes up for a game that we loved, we're going to grab it. And Space 1889 was my favorite in the 80s. I didn't get to play it that much because, as we all know, sometimes the magic doesn't happen or you bounce off the system or whatever. But I always loved the setting and getting to play with it. It's Victorian space, and updating it both mechanically and setting wise for modern audiences it's a challenge, right? It's going to be very interesting. It came out at a time right before steampunk became a word. And I like to joke, just like Kraftwerk is the godfather of techno, Space 89 is the godfather of steampunk.
Victorian era spacefaring is the tag that they use on Wikipedia.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm digging it.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, you're British trying to colonize Mars, but Mars has people on it. So it looks a lot like real colonization, in the 1880s. So it's dirty and ugly, and it's got all this promise, but it's got flying ships. And what got me into it was a board game called Sky Galleons of Mars, which we played the hell out of. And it had flying Martian spaceships and British gunboats, and so much fun.
What is Fading Sun?
So Fading Suns, it's the far flung future, and
the banner art on that is awesome.
Yeah, it is. And so I don't want to say it's Dune, but it's basically it's like Dune, right? It's very much like
it's
Dune.
Totally not Dune. That's the description.
yeah, totally not Dune, right? Yeah, but yeah, it's the Bill Bridges did most of his work originally for Werewolf and things like and Vampire and all those. Yeah. And this was their taking it to space, and so yeah, you've got this sort of devolved society that's fallen back into medieval a little bit, but you've also got super high technology at the same time. So the Dune style personal shields and ships and things like that. So part of your adventure, you could be at the tavern and there's, space rats in the sewer and we got to deal with that. And then you look up and there's like a mega ship above you and the emperor's here. Oh man, it just shifts gears like that. And it's big and crazy and expansive, and that hard to grasp far future where we've evolved so far beyond anything recognizable. It's very, very deep. That's a deep game. You talk about options.
So do you have a favorite genre as far as playing, running, and writing?
So my favorite genre, bar none, is wuxia. I love it. I don't really get to write for it, although I did write for Savage Worlds. It's coming up. It's The Legend of Ghost Mountain, which is kind of their take on a wuxia, pulp setting, essentially.
Okay.
And that's my favorite, for for playing, for running, for writing, I don't get to do that as much because it's like, well, I don't have a lot of ownership of that.
Yeah.
For writing, I tend to like anything like pulpy and hardcore and supers, like, so I've been doing the Necessary Evil 3, where it's cosmic supervillains, which we're pitching as Guardians of the Galaxy meets Suicide Squad.
Oh, nice.
And like that's fun. I like those big pulpy, dangerous, oh man, you're all gonna die, adventures. That it just always ends in chaos. That's what I like.
Gotta love that chaos. So, during the apocalypse, you find yourself gaming more or less or the same.
For gaming, so I was in a golden age before this hit. I had 3 different groups running weekly, like long-standing campaigns with different people in them. That's almost impossible, and literally only possible because for a bunch of us it's our job. So it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to work playing this
I'm
campaign.
working. Yeah. And that was in person too. There were 3 in-person games.
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
It was great, So it's cooled off a little bit because of COVID. I'm mostly doing stuff online now with Roll20, and Zoom and things like that. Down to 1 a week, if that. Sometimes it's every other, but we're still playing, right? Like we still get together, like we still get to do things. So I'm not, it's not the dark ages, I went through the dark ages, like a decade ago, where all your friends move out of town and online hadn't really become, it was doable. Like we tried it, but it didn't work for us then. It does now. Like I think the tools across the board between Fantasy Grounds and Foundry and Roll20, you got a lot of options that make it pretty easy to connect now. Whereas back then it didn't work, so we just didn't get to play much back then.
Yeah, I'm in games where we use Roll20. I'm in games where we just use Zoom.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like across the board.
Yeah, exactly. And I like that those options exist for everyone. Like there's the right tool for every system, and it's not the same one over and over, right? Like,
and the group, right? The group, the different groups want different things too. So
yeah, exactly. Like as a player, it's like sometimes I really like to get tactical. Like, I don't want it always to be like that. Like obviously story's king and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, part of that story comes from drawing back and like, here's the situation. Now we got to fight for our lives, and where you're standing is important. I love getting into that and having the ability to get into that on a VTT. And if you're just like, oh, it's going to be theater of the imagination, we're just talking without it.
Yeah,
that can work and that can be really fun, but I'm going to miss that piece,
the nuance.
Yeah, and so, but every game's different. So cool. If we're just playing Apocalypse World, hell, all right, Zoom, let's do this. Right?
Yeah. So in our in our recent games, like we've had some evolutions where, like Ted will now set up a separate camera for terrain, and like he'll just move all the minis himself, and we still kind of have that. It's not quite the same because you get like the one angle,
right?
But it's still it's not bad. And then like I'll do like VTT Lite where I'll use Dungeon Fog, which has some different features that are like Fog of War that you can use so people can kind of get an idea of what's going on. And then,
so honestly, the best $100 that I've spent in the last couple of years was when Hero Forge Minis did their latest Kickstarter, and they had it was like $100 lifetime subscription to Token Maker.
Oh yeah.
Even like right before like COVID was really a thing. So
yeah, when they did the color minis, yeah.
Exactly. So I'm like, well, I don't play online that much, but I think it'd be cool to be able to use this to make like character portraits for NPCs and things like that. So I got that. And now, oh man, it's
Yeah.
great. Like, even if you don't have the subscription, everyone, you should check that out. Because, you talk about like having to make the miniatures and move them around and all that. With that token maker, you just make a token. Here's its thing. Off you go. I got like 100 different guys. Cool.
Yeah, it becomes super, super easy.
It is. And that
Yeah.
makes it less scary to engage with. You're like, oh, cool. Yeah, I've got a bunch of guys. Here, let's play this. Like, let's get tactical.
So Kelsey wants to know, do you guys know of good places to find new groups to play with online? I feel like it's like easier than ever. I mean, there's tons of different discords you can jump in. All the VTTs have their own like forums and stuff where, there's a looking for group or whatever, Facebook groups. So I don't know, hit them all until you find a group that works for you.
Yeah, and I'm the worst person in the world for that. Like, I'm terrible at it. I need to like know people usually before I'll
Yeah.
settle in and have a game. Like, I like if I don't get invited, I'm the shy one that's like, okay, have fun playing. So
I mean, also too, like I guess like a good way to do that is just getting involved in communities online, and then asking people, hey, let's play a game. Is usually a good way to go as well.
the other good one is a lot of places are starting to try to do virtual conventions more often. So I know Pinnacle is working on this where like once a month they're going to get like a game together. And if you follow their Savage Worlds online SWO crew, like that's their whole goal is to create spaces for people to play. And this is something we're working on at Ulysses too. I think we're doing one this weekend actually. I don't know. I don't have the information to share. Like, we haven't gotten that out there, so I don't know how well it's going to do. But like, yeah, we try to get the word out. Like, hey, we're going to have some virtual games going on this weekend. You can watch if you want. You can play if you want. Like, here's the mechanism for that. And that's something we're working on. We're not very good at yet, I don't think, but we're getting better at. And so ask, like go to the game that you want to play and literally like ask their feedback. Where are our games? How do I get to play? And they'll respond.
Yeah, because I mean, they want you to play their game. That makes a lot of sense. That's actually great advice.
Absolutely do. Yeah.
Players become customers. So we started like this Saturday morning game after kind of like, I guess it was like right around when COVID was hitting. Like just prior to that, we actually had this like big slumber party of a bunch of like online people. We just kind of like all met up and hung out for the weekend. And then they were like, oh, we want to keep this going. So one of the people was like, well, I'll run a game for a little bit on Saturdays. And then like COVID hit and everyone's locked down. Or like, how about we just keep doing this and we'll just make it drop in and drop out. If people want to play, they can. If not,
yeah.
And then, so one of the things we discovered after starting this was like people are getting busier because of all the virtual cons. It's like when they're physical cons, you're like, oh, well, there's a lot of expenses and travel involved and time. But when they're like virtual, people are asking you to do things and it's like you're more inclined to say yes. But then, like, you find you're saying yes to more and more things.
Yeah. Like, wait, I got 3 cons this month? Oh my God. I don't know.
How did that happen? Yeah.
Yeah, so, it is. And they're out there. Like, it's all communication.
Although it does feel like it's slowed down a little bit because, like, it seems like everyone's trying to fill a void, right? And then they're like, all right. Now I think, yeah, they get tired. We get tired. But, one day we'll be back to in person.
Yeah, well, I think it's coming sooner than later, but I also don't think virtual is going to go away because I think that works better for a lot of people. Like,
I mean, even just gaming, like a lot of people are discovering they can game online that we're like, I'll never do that, right? But now it's like, well, like this is the only way to do it. We don't know how long this is going to be the only way to do it.
Yeah.
And then you break your own inertia and then you're like, oh, that's not so
exactly
bad.
Like we got over the hump and now it's like, oh, I've got a friend in Denver.
Yeah.
Cool. We can still play.
Or Denmark.
Yeah. So, right. Yeah. I ain't driving to Denver for a game, but we can do it online. That'll be great.
which is cool because I think like I've gamed with someone from like every continent but Antarctica. I'm gonna find that penguin that's down the game at some point or another. So I mean, so that's kind of cool. Like they both have their pros and cons.
They do like the thing that I like, and the and we're all figuring it out the hard way, like as we go, right? Like
Yeah,
what works and what doesn't. And I think what really works is when a virtual convention has a Twitch front room, essentially, that's got whatever the featured game is or the featured panel, that anyone that goes to that landing page can see something going on. And it's like a real convention where it's like,
yeah,
oh, there's the big hall, and you kind of peek in, and you're like, I don't know if I care about what's going on there, but there's something going on, and it makes it feel like a live convention. And then, okay, let me go. Oh, I'm supposed to be at table 21. Let me go to that room. Cool. But I,
have you
that,
seen? They actually have these like virtual spaces now, and it's just starting to take off. Like I've heard about it, and I've kind of seen like the demos, but I haven't done it yet. Where you can go and it's like that, right? Except for you're kind of like you can wander around. You have your person wander around, but then
yeah.
you go to the table or you go to a room, and then you're like in a Zoom call or whatever, a video chat.
Yeah, that's too much for me.
Yeah,
like, oh, now this feels like the same work of trying to find my way around. Like, I really like just, oh, here it is. Like, I can see the panel and then switch to my game. Because more often than not, like, oh, because of scheduling, I didn't get a game. So having that mainstream is great for me, because if I don't have it, I don't feel like anything's going on at all. Like I had that a little bit with virtual Gen Con, where it's like,
yeah.
oh, stuff didn't work out for my schedule. So now I'm not really doing anything. I might as well just go eat lunch or something.
Eventually, we're gonna have VR where we will be able to walk around on the virtual con floor, and like, except for the person behind the table, the booth is going to be like a centaur. It's coming.
Yeah, I mean, probably can't stop it as much as
Yeah.
I
Well,
try.
so like, I was talking to another game designer, and they're in the VR, and they're telling me that there's like movie screenings that you go into in
Oh yeah.
VR and watch movies with other people.
Oh yeah.
So I was like, oh, wait a minute. I mean, so we're gonna get eventually like VTTs will be us sitting at a virtual table with avatars and everything,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
uh, which is gonna be cool
But
because we're gonna be like sitting around the table like gods, and then like
I
you're
have
gonna have the
abs.
maps
This
and
is the
everything
best.
3 dimensional in front of you.
I have abs. I have hair.
Yeah.
Hooray.
Yeah, we'll finally meet people in person. Be like, you don't look like your avatar at
Yeah.
all.
What happened to you, man?
Yeah, but the future is bright.
It is, but I'm a big believer in like that core old school, like that's cool. If you got the headset and you've got the technology and someone set that all up, fantastic. But I really like there's something to be said for the cheap alternative. And this was something else we were joking about before, where I think like one of the strengths of the original Dungeons and Dragons is it looked kind of cheap and shoddy.
Yeah.
So you could like type up your own adventure on a typewriter and it would look uneven and crappy, and you doodle in the margins, and then go to the Xerox store and Xerox it or mimeograph it and staple it, and it
Kinkos.
looked up, yeah, exactly, right, and it looked about like a printed product, so you felt good, like, oh cool, like I can do this, right? And I think there's always going to be room for that cheaper, rougher, more inviting lower end, right? That I can do this,
Yeah.
like, sure, this is just a webcam in our table, but it's fun, and that's what matters. And then other people look at that and go, wait, I've got a webcam, I've got a table, I can do that. Cool. And the awesome ones float to the top, right?
Yeah.
But getting people in to try, getting them over that fear and that barrier, I think is important.
Well, I mean, even if like you look at the very first episodes of Critical Role, where they're like still in somebody's apartment and they're just
Right.
recording, you know, you get that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, like, I know a lot of people are looking at getting into, Twitch streaming or whatever. And a lot of game companies are, right? Because for us, it's a way to reach the people that we can't otherwise reach. We joke that we just sell our books to the people that already buy our books
Yeah.
because we can't find, it's like, we know there's other people out there, but how do we reach them? Well, Twitch was one way, and we're all really bad at it, right? Like, I was like, oh,
It's
I'm
hard,
not,
it's hard because everything's like a whole nother job.
yeah.
Um, and I've talked to different companies about it when they started, and I'm like, there's this like inclination to want to like talk about your products, and I'm like, don't do that.
I do it all the
It,
time.
that's the opposite of what you're going like of to accomplish the opposite of what you want to do. Like it's like you have to make it entertaining. Like I remember like when Think Geek was the thing, right?
Right.
And they would do these shows and they were decent enough, but they were just like almost like reviews of their products. I'm like, you guys have the budget, you guys have the space, you have everything. Even your personalities are decent. The problem is you just keep talking about the stuff you're selling. Like nobody cares. Like that's not entertain people. You entertain people, and then
Well,
they'll start spending money in your store.
I think what it comes down to is passion.
Yeah,
Like, you can talk about your product if there's that passion. If, like, oh, I'm really excited about what we're doing, I think that can work, right? Like, but you also have to have room to talk about whatever else you're passionate about, and that's what's going to draw people in. Like,
yeah.
one
You
of my
need to find ways to connect with people.
yeah,
You know.
one of my favorite, the so the Germans do more streaming. The German side of Ulysses that I work for,
Yeah.
we're working on building up our streaming, our English streaming, but we're light years below what they're doing in Germany. They've got a show there that I love. I mean, I can't understand a word that they're saying, but I
Uh,
love it. The concept is it's old men talk about old games.
uh,
And they're not games that Ulysses owns. Like, it's not that, but it's what they're passionate about, right?
yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
we're going to talk about Traveler today, first edition Traveler, how my character died when I rolled him up. Like, I love that stuff. And they're super passionate about it. And it spins off into something, right? Like, that was so popular that they ended up reprinting Traveler first edition over it. It's like, okay, cool.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. Like, so you, like the audience will watch, they're entertained, they connect with those guys, and it's like, and when you describe it now, I think they need to be replaced with Muppets. But
Old Muppets talk about old games. What?
yeah, everything's better if you just replace people with Muppets.
Fair.
At least that's where my brain goes anyway.
Are you a Chaos Muppet or an Order Muppet?
Oh, depends. It really depends on the day. Flip a coin. So I think that probably makes me a chaos Muppet, right?
Right?
Because if all you did was chaos, and never order, that would be predictable. So you gotta mix that in there.
Right.
Sure.
I'm right on the line too, right? And this is why I like half creative, half product manager, where like I make a lot of my money in the industry keeping projects online. Like, I'll write for Torg, but really I'm making sure it gets out the door on time.
Yeah.
So like that's my Order Muppet side, but then the writing is the Chaos Muppet side. It's like, I'm going to blow up this entire setting.
Boom.
Right.
What are you playing nowadays?
Like, so I'm going to go back to Savage Worlds. We're just about to start a Savage Pathfinder game.
Okay.
I'm about to start running playtests for my Space 1889, which was a pain because we can't do it face to face because of COVID, which means I had to build all of the character sheets and roll 20.
Yeah.
That's the one I'm most familiar with, so I opted for that. And I had to, blow the dust off some seriously old HTML and cascading style sheet skills that I didn't think I'd use again.
And what core mechanic does that game use?
So, and this is actually stuff we haven't really talked about, because we know it's going to be sort of based on the old one, but I want to evoke the old one without getting trapped in some of its limitations. So it's mostly D6s. You'll have your trait, like whether it's helm or science or whatever, and you'll roll D6s equal to that trait. And the old one, traits were 1 to 6, with 6 being
Uh-huh.
like oh my god, legendary, and 1 being like meh, Harold, hey, how you doing? And 4 plus is a success, 1 to 3 is not, and then there's variations within there.
So is this a game that's going to be crowdfunded?
Yeah. I mean, so there's an all but the biggest, corporate games. There is an expectation that you're going to go crowdfunding. Like this one, when it shows up, and it'll be another year at least. Like we're still in development because we want to make it right. It would be very easy to reprint material from Space 1889 because it was so iconic in its own way.
Yeah.
But instead, we have to take a step back and think it through. Like, what do we want to do with this? What are we doing with this game? What are we keeping? What needs to be updated? In terms of visual, in terms of the background, in terms of everything. And when that's done, we'll go to Kickstarter because Kickstarter's the crowdfunding platform. Now, follow-ons will probably be on the Game On platform, which is quite good, but just doesn't have quite the same reach as Kickstarter for an original one. But the reason why especially mid-level companies love crowdfunding is it gives us an indication of
Money.
the orders. Yeah. Well, money's nice, but more than money, like we're going to do the game anyway, right? Like we've already invested in it. It's going to get printed even if we only have one backer, right? But if we only have one backer, that tells us, well, don't print 10,000 of those books because no one cares. And also the sequel's done. Like there isn't going to be follow-up books, right? We only had one guy that cared. All right, forget it. So that's really important to us to be able to get to print to roughly audience interest. That saves us a ton, right? And keeps games that might otherwise be too small to be successful, that keeps them in the sweet spot where they can keep coming out.
I haven't really looked at Game On yet.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's like I say, I don't do like with Kickstarter. I will look on Kickstarter every Tuesday to see what new hot games are coming out. I haven't fallen into that with Game On yet, but it's got a lot of stuff, and mostly it's being used as a backer kit for other Kickstarters. But once you're already into it and doing like follow-up ones, and then some companies are starting to do their own, specific platform just for their own stuff. It's like, hey, if you want the next book in this, just join our little crowdfunding thing and you'll get updated.
Did you see the crowdfunding for Hero Quest?
I did, yeah.
I was like, Hasbro. I was like, really, guys?
Well, right, but
it makes sense. It makes sense.
It does. Like, and you get that pushback, and this is why some big companies, like, if you're dealing with Warhammer, they won't let you crowdfund, right? Because they're like, no, we're Warhammer, right? We're big. We're too big to crowdfund. Don't do it. But it makes sense for like a Hero Quest because you go like, okay, all of these people have fond memories of Hero Quest, and they think, oh, I'm going to buy it if it comes out. Are you though?
So $3 million later, apparently they are.
Exactly. Well, but if you're Hasbro and you're like, is there an interest for this? You put it up there. And it's like, yeah, $1 million later, and you go, okay, yes, there is. We're pretty confident in this product and we can do all these things. Whereas
I just thought it was funny they built their own.
Yeah. That's you're going to see that
platform.
more and more. I think the biggest opportunity for anyone, any programmers out there is a meta aggregator for crowdfundings.
Oh yeah.
That are, like at least for us would be based on role playing or board game genre, but going out because as a consumer, it's like, well, if that company's got their own and that company's got their own and Game On's doing half of them and I want one place that I can go that's going to show me everything that's coming out. And if it also like did reviews and ratings like a Rotten Tomatoes or whatever and aggregated it, oh heck yeah, So someone that's brilliant out there, make that. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're on the you'll be the winner in the crowdfunding sweepstakes that come out. Because everyone will go to you. And you
So
can go to.
I know like with Kickstarter and like from what I've been told and from us running one is it's like it's just another place to market really essentially is what it becomes is because half of the people that end up backing your Kickstarter have never heard of you. And I mean that number might even be higher depending on
Oh yeah.
how much
That
reach your company has.
well, and even companies with reach, right? Like that reach is always in the same places. They're
Yeah.
advertising to the same people that have already seen their games. And that was what was really exciting about Kickstarter is, and why Kickstarter is the king of the crowdfunding platforms is it's got more audience than the other ones. Like if you put a game Kickstarter up, yes, some people are coming to it because you advertised on Facebook or on RPGNet or whatever, but more are people that just look at Kickstarter on Tuesday, like I do. Like, oh,
Yeah.
cool, what's coming out?
Well, I would say that's part of it, but then also Kickstarter is really good at when someone backs something, it sparks a series, it triggers a series of events that happen that
Yeah.
leads to more people seeing
Oh
what
yeah.
that Kickstarter is.
Oh yeah. And there's all these like little cheats that you do because you want to be a project that they love. So you got to submit and have your video like the funny thing is like buyers never watch the video, but Kickstarter does. So if your video looks cool to them, you're going
Yeah.
to be a project they love and that's going to push you up on the page, so it's totally worth doing the video. And you're the you want to draw the fine line between having a realistic goal but not like a high goal, because if you exceed your goal you start floating up on algorithms as, oh, this is popular, it's
Yeah.
more than people expected, so now you're coming back up on the page again.
It's
So
always weird when I look at Kickstarters, right? Again, I've only done one, so when I look and I'll see like a goal, I'll say a goal, I'm like, oh my god, if we would have if we would have set a goal like that and just fund it, we would have been able to make the thing. How can
oh
you make a
yeah,
book for that amount?
it is, and that's a risk, right? And that's a
Yeah.
legitimate risk. So you like when you're talking goal setting is like, do you set the a real, like if you set an unrealistically low goal,
Yeah.
just hit it, yeah, you're screwed, right? Like, well,
I wonder how many people do that. Like they're like,
oh, a lot of people do. A lot of people do. Absolutely. Because I know what it costs to print books and all that, and where your profit line hits.
yeah.
And I know a lot of projects are way under that. And then there's obviously like, oh, we made a good deal with a printer, or we cut a corner, or whatever.
Well,
But and
even
that's
just producing the book, like not like actually printing the book, but actually producing the book.
oh yeah,
That cost us more than printing the book.
oh yeah.
So,
Right. But the fun thing is like your money's gone from producing it, so you
yeah.
still need money to print it,
Yeah.
or
Oh,
else
yeah. Yeah. No,
it's all for
absolutely.
naught, so
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, what we've tried to do with ours is we'll set a goal that is, it's still lower, it's lower than our break even, but it's in the, we're not destroyed. Like, if we cut corners, we can do it and all that. So if it just barely funds, we're okay. And the real, like the cool, we're making money is much higher, obviously, but we've exceeded that like across the board. So, hooray, we get to still keep making games. But
That is the beauty. I think it was Monty Cook Games. I'd seen a panel and Shannon Germain was talking about like their business model. So it's like I'm not giving away any secrets here. That like you're not funding whatever that thing is that's on Kickstarter right now. You're funding the next thing, right? Because like their business model is to do like 3-4 successful Kickstarters a year, and that funds their business, their company.
some people do that, not everyone. Like ours, it's very much like the projects are individual silos, and if
Yeah,
one fails big time, yes, we have the company to fall back on, but you get too many of those, and we won't have a company to fall back on
Well,
anymore.
that's true too. And also, like some companies are just consistent too. Like
Yeah,
it's like
they,
Monty Cook Games puts up a Kickstarter. It usually does about $250,000, right?
right.
So
Yeah, exactly. You're set, right?
it's
And like, and our
it's not
torque
Matt
ones,
Colville, but at the same time they're doing okay.
yeah, and our torque ones have been the same. Where it's like, hey, we're hitting nearly 200K on these. These are great. Like our
Yeah.
break even points much lower than that. So
So well, the cool thing about that, it allows companies, at least with them, like I know because like we've had Monty Cook on a couple times to talk to him, and like the vibe that I got and from things that he said is like they've always wanted to bring back kind of like the old school bullpen kind of gaming company, which is really hard to do in this day and age. So, and
yeah,
that's where Kickstarter kind of comes in and helps them do that.
yeah, it is. I mean, that's honestly Pinnacle runs a lot like that. Like when you see them behind the scenes, where it's like, cool, this is just a bunch of creators getting together and creating stuff. This is
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
I'm psyched to be part of it, and Spiel can be like that too, right? Like we've all got our lines that we run, but within that, like the people that we gather, people that are passionate about it. Passion's everything.
it's a good time to be in and around the industry. It's fun. Have you noticed that things are like there was a huge boost for D&D, with 5e? Do you but then like I know like other companies weren't necessarily seeing that. Do you see that finally starting to catch up?
No, yeah. So I'm going to quote Shane. Shane Hensley. One of his quotes that he likes to do is, "A high tide raises all boats," and
Yeah.
it's totally true, right? Because even though you don't see it immediately, right? D&D is bringing people into game stores and they're buying role playing stuff. Now, honestly, most of what they're buying is D&D. Fine, but eventually, players hit the limit, right? Like, okay, I've played D&D. Is there anything else out there?
Yeah, or they don't want to be a dwarf, right? They want to, they want to be an alien this time or a
Yeah,
superhero, and then they start looking.
exactly. And then it's a
Or
matter of, are we the ones they find or is it someone else?
yeah. I find a lot of them like they try and see if they can do it with D&D, and then they realize there's games that actually do that, and then they start poking around. So I always figured there would be a lag between when the renaissance for D&D happened and then other games
Yeah.
starting to really see it of 2 to 3 years, but it's been closer to 3 or 5, I think.
Well, and COVID's going to affect that. But
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
and the other thing though is it's made it part of the popular conscience, right? Because you got all these people streaming Dungeons and Dragons, and like it used to be, you'd say like, oh, I write role playing games, like, oh, like computer games.
yeah.
Yeah, like computer games.
Yeah.
Fine. Like I don't. This is not a conversation that
And
I
you had
need
to
to
work
get
your
in.
way up to even that, though, right? So
Yeah, right. And but now it's like D&D. Yeah, like D&D. Pretty
yeah,
much. Okay, cool.
and that's the kind of thing. At least there is something where you say RPGs or tabletop RPGs. People may not know what you're saying, but if you go Dungeons and Dragons, it now has brand recognition, even with people who don't know what that is.
Exactly. And that
So,
pushes that out. And like that's our entire problem is reaching those people who have never heard of any of this.
yeah,
Like, and if
yeah.
we can get them interested and invested,
I
okay,
always so I see
now
like
we're
a
talking.
company will get these cool licenses, and then like I've never seen them handled particularly well from my perspective. I mean, I don't know all the ins and outs, but it just seems like if you've got the Star Wars property, right, that should be bigger than it is,
Well,
right? I
it
feel like
sure
all you end
costs
up
like it's
with
bigger.
what's that?
Say it sure costs like it's bigger.
Yeah. But
That's part of
it
the
does to
risk of an
me.
IP.
It doesn't appear that they're pulling from the fandom as much as they're pulling Star Wars fans that happen to play role playing games.
It is, and that's the pro, and that's legitimately our struggle as an industry. Is like we
Yeah.
are selling to the same people. We never managed to break into. The only time I've ever seen it uh, recently, and it shocked me, like completely shocked me, was Root, which Mark Diaz Truman and his Magpie games were
Uh,
doing a Powered by the Apocalypse role playing game based on the board game Root. And
yeah.
you think like, okay, board gamers and role playing gamers do not cross over Not that many people have heard of Root. That was like a $600,000 Kickstarter because all of the board game players that don't play role-playing games actually came over.
Yeah.
And you don't see that usually. So it's like, that's fascinating. Like, that's a big win. How do we do that, right?
So Maximum Apocalypse was a board game, tabletop game that then they did the RPG for.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was kind of interesting because it was just like one of the fans who played RPGs is like, this would make a good RPG, and decided to make it into an RPG, and then go to the company and be like, hey, I want to make this game. And then they did.
Well, it's the same with Myth for us, where it's like, okay, like that was one of those Kickstarters that we say like their production costs exceeded what they earned, and they earned like $2 million or something like that.
Oh,
right?
wow.
But actually making everything ended up more than that, and they were sunk, right? So Ulysses is like, well, we got money, you got 100,000 fans, let's see if we can, make float this, right?
Yeah.
And as part of that, we're like, well, we've got this IP, let's make a role-playing game. And if we sell to a fraction of those 100,000, if we bring some of those board game players into the role-playing game, that's a win. That's a much bigger audience than anything else we've put out, if they come. But you don't know.
Well, I'm curious to see what happens with Cortex, because the same people that own Cortex own D&D Beyond, and it's fandom, and there's a lot of connection, and I know like Adam Bradford's heavily involved in all that, and he's super savvy when it comes to this stuff. So I'm curious to see if he's able to make that crossover. Sometimes I think it's licensing too, where like you just don't have the ability to approach their fandoms because of maybe the agreements and the licensing, where as a game designer, you're like super excited to get to work on the IP, but you let yourself get hobbled where you should have maybe turned down the deal because it was expensive and you can't really take advantage of it.
Oh yeah. Right. And then there's the other side of that. Like, I know, Bill Slavichek, who worked on the Star Wars D6 RPGs, way back in the day. Yeah. Like, he's so psyched every time, a new episode of Mandalorian comes out and something that they made up for their books, like, is on that show.
Yeah, because there wasn't canon for a lot of things. They actually took the stuff from that and made it canon.
It was, Like, there's so many things, like he'll talk about, even in the Last Jedi, when they mentioned like med packs. Yeah. Somebody says, get him a med pack. He's like, oh, med packs, that's from us. Like, yeah.
We're making them so much money with our ideas. Yay.
I mean, yeah, but that's part of it, right? Like, you got to play in that universe and you got paid to do it, right? Yeah. You made money, like at your game on your IP. Maybe not as much as a movie, sure, but it's there. And if they can't use those ideas, then you've cornered yourself, right? Like, so it's cool to see them. It's like, man, great.
Bragging rights, consolation prize. So we are past the hour mark or so. So this is when we wrap things up. Final thoughts before we head out?
No, this was fun. It's good to talk nerd stuff anytime.
It always is, man. It was good to catch up, Darrell. It's been a while.
Yeah. It was good to hear from you again.
So until next time, everyone, stay nerdy.